right, so we're going to bring up our next speaker, Rick Williams. Rick's an educator. I first met Rick when I was 14 years old. I went into the Upward Bound program, and Rick's influence actually changed my life, me and many others. I remember I was sitting in Senator Barrazo's office. I was accompanying the Northern Cheyenne, the Cheyenne River Sioux, and the Eastern Shoshone, and we were in there asking for more money for the BIA roads. We were in Senator Barrazo's office, and I ran into one of my old Upward Bound classmates, and we shared pleasantries, but later on we went out and we talked. And the first thing that came up was Upward Bound and Mr. Rick Williams. And we both talked about how we were sitting there listening to Rick talk, and it was the first time both of us res boys had seen a Native man in a three-piece suit, wingtip shoes, and how that moment changed our lives forever, and how it propelled us into doing other things and getting into the Western world in different positions. But Rick's an educator, and he's dedicated his life to lifting up Native youth through the Upward Bound program, which has produced hundreds of Native professionals who are leaders in their fields. He is also the author of the Trek Report, a modern-day story of Native history in Colorado, one that parents should be sharing with their children so the true history of this land is remembered. Thank you, Rick. Come on.
How, Medako Yapi, Lakota Imachapi, Tatanka Huhaska, Namila Haska Imachapi, Rick Williams, Mie Ogolala Lakota na Ake Shaela. Greetings, friends and relatives. Ampetuki Ata Lilawashte. Today is a good day. My Lakota name is Tatanka Huhaska, long-legged bull buffalo. I'm enrolled on the Pine Ridge Reservation, but I grew up right outside of Fort Robinson. I was raised by my Cheyenne grandmothers. One of them was a survivor of, they call it a breakout or outbreak, but it was really a massacre at Fort Robinson, and she survived. So a lot of the stories that I got as a little boy was from her. I was raised by my grandmother. She took me when I was 5 months old, raised me. They both spoke Cheyenne and Lakota, and they could sign. They was always signing. So, in a lot of ways, I had knowledge and experiences that go back for hundreds of years from my relatives, from my grandmothers. It was a very special honor to have been raised that way. First thing I need to do is thank Valerie. I think Valerie works 25 hours a day. You know, and her and Victor and the staff for putting this thing together. I really want to acknowledge them. I'd like to acknowledge Rick Waters for hosting us here in the Indian Center. Very special day. I'd like to also thank the council, the Denver City Council. I'd like to thank them in a good way, and you know, Stacy and the work that they did behind the scenes to make things happen for Indian people. And I have to say this because I've lived here for 54 years in Denver. Came here when I was 17 years old when my grandmother passed away. Came here basically as an orphan. And I've watched Denver for this whole time, 54 years. And there's never been anything done on the behalf of Indian people outside of the Tall Bull Memorial Park to help Indian people adjust to the city of Denver, to be a part of the community of Denver, to be part of the governing structure of Denver, to be part of the Colorado State Legislature. So I'm really honored to have Stacy here, and I know we had one of the other council members here, because they are the champions for Indian people in the Denver community today, and good things are happening. And so I wanted to take care of thanking people in a good way, because we have a lot. We owe them a lot for making changes that are going to make a difference in our lives going forward. Today, I'm going to start my presentation with. Let me just have a quick background on the TREC report. The TREC report was produced by. I had 8 researchers working with me. We had 7 members of the commission, the TREC commission. Almost every nation that was involved and had a treaty after 1850 here in Colorado had a representative on the commission. At that time, we had 6 members of the people of the sacred land, all Native people who had a vested interest in what was happening here in Colorado. And this whole thing was prompted by Evans's proclamations, illegal proclamations, one declaring war on Indians, the other one where they, can you imagine this? They said any Colorado citizen can kill an Indian and take their property. That was statewide. That was horrific. When I first learned that, oh my God, that can't be legal. And so when we did some work on it, we searched it out, and it turns out those laws were still on the books 3 years ago. And that's what prompted me to do that on my Cheyenne side, my great-great-grandfather, Whitehorse, this is where he lived. This was his homeland, right here, by Cherry Creek, just a little ways from here. This was his homeland. They would leave this area, but they would always come back. In addition to that, on my Lakota side, I'm descended from an old Oglala chief named Old Smoke. He used to winter here also by the confluence. That confluence was one of the most important areas for Indian people for 10,000 years. And now we're starting to have some recognition about this land and this place and what it means to people. I'm going to cover a number of different topics, but I think that some of this stuff is going to be specific and generalized in a lot of ways, and I apologize for that. And if I can have the next slide. I took federal and Indian law 3 times at the University of Colorado. David Getches, Bruce Green, and Vine Deloria taught the class. It was, I'm not sure how to raise this up. But I had that opportunity to do that 3 times. And not once in any of those Not once in any of those 3 courses did they ever mention this. And what this was because of the removal of Indians from the east into Indian territory, I think the United States government felt bad about doing that, because they made this pronouncement that they would, in the Indian Trade and Intercourse Act, that this whole area of land was designated as the it had congressional title of ownership, which superseded Aboriginal title of ownership. A lot of people didn't know this, that all of this land was ours. There was no doubt about it. Article 1 of this act. Next slide, please. Section 11, this is an interesting one. Basically, it says, nobody but traders who pay $20,000 for a license and military officers were allowed to stay in any of that red area ever. They were prohibited. And if they were there and they stayed, they could go through it, but if they stayed, they were going to be fined $1,000 and removed. So when you think about occupation here in Colorado, those people weren't supposed to be here. 1834 on, they're not supposed to be here. It's illegal. It was illegal for them to be here. This was our land. Next slide. So this is the actual language of the act. Where it says at the very last line, deemed to be Indian country. Taken and deemed to be the purpose of this act. It's a congressional act. It has importance for Colorado because there were places that were Indian land that may have been taken without permission. Next slide. So then you have, after this, you have a gold rush going on in California. Lots of people are coming through the area, and the United States government recognizes that they need to have assurances that these people who are coming across the land would have access, would be safe. And so they get all of these tribes together, and they have a meeting, and they pass that. They make this treaty, what's called the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1851. Now, when you think about treaties, and this specific treaty didn't necessarily guarantee land assignments. It talks about boundaries, and that's a big difference in title, is boundaries versus the assignments. The way they came to make this a reality was, in this meeting, they had all of these tribes, and you know how we're really tribal-centric? We're all fighting by saying, this is my land, that's not, no, we're fighting over this land. And consequently, they had to come up with some kind of idea about, how are they going to divide this land up? They invited all of these tribes to come in that had a vested interest, that were occupying the area, had Aboriginal title, had congressional title, but it wasn't explicit. And so they break this up, but like I said, the Crows are over here, and they say, well, all of this land, all the way down to New Mexico is ours. The Cheyenne says, no, that's ours. The Arapahoes, no, that's ours. And so there's this big fight, and for 3 days they argue about this. And finally, they're not finding any resolution, so they came up with this priest named DeSmit, who pretended to be an authority on Indians, and said, hey, I can figure this out. And he drew this crude map and said, these are the people that occupy this land. Now, one of the things you'll notice is that there's some people there's some tribes that were absent. 1851, where are the Kiowas? The Kiowas were here in this part. They were in Denver. They were in this area through this entire time. But they don't show up on this map. The Comanches were invited, but they couldn't make it. The Pawnees were invited, but they got into a conflict on the way with the Lakotas, and so they went back. So you have tribes who were supposed to be part of this should have had opportunities to have discussions with this and never did. The Utes were not invited. And so consequently, you get this mishmash of artificial representation of land ownership. I think, unfortunately, I don't have a slide of this, but this is what it basically looks like. When you look when you overlay everybody's ownership, and ownership's not the right term for occupation and use for areas, this map probably better reflects the intersections of all the tribes who had an interest in Colorado. And so this is more of a reflective map of what really should have been happening rather than this. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. Treaty of 1851, you can see where it's at. Here's the interesting thing about the 51 Treaty. It was never affirmed by a president. It was ratified by the Senate, and what happened is Article 7 called for the treaty to be 50 years long. It gets to the Senate changes it to 10 years. They try to pass it through there, and President gets it. He must have had a conscience, because he said, did the Indians agree to this amendment? They're looking around. Well, no. He said, well, you better get it. You better get an amendment to it. So they went out and they tried to get an amendment, but they never could get the signatures that they needed. If you go and look at the original signatures from the 51 Treaty, interesting enough, there's no Northern Cheyennes that ever signed it, but it was approved by the Council of 44, and a very special ceremony involved with that. But when they went out to get the amendments, there was no way possible they were ever going to get those signatures of all those people back again, and they didn't. They falsified the document, tried to move it forward. People realized that it was not acceptable, and they tried until 1920. They were still trying to get this thing affirmed by a president. They took it to the Secretary of State. They said, we don't do treaties anymore. We're not going to sign this. So this treaty was never affirmed, and based on my research, I would have to conclude, because it was never affirmed by a president, the validity of this treaty is in question. In addition to that, common law says a treaty is a contract. A contract with two people means that you have to have two signatures. The second signature never came. And then based on the McGirt case, I don't know if you're all familiar with the McGirt case, it really has to do with the basis of the McGirt case is you have to have a congressional approval and a presidential signature in order for a treaty to be validated. So that never happened with this treaty, but it went through a whole bunch of configurations where people, until just a few years ago, believed this was true, that it was a valid treaty. Next slide, please. So, how do we end up with land in Colorado? The Trek report dealt with time from 1850 forward, and there was a reason why we did this. It was because we were confused. We heard there was 48 tribes that had, rights to Colorado. We had reports that there were 100 tribes. We had reports of tribes being left off. The cattle, for example, spent 2 years on that reservation where Sand Creek is during the Civil War to protect them from the South who were attacking the cattle. Do they qualify as being, having a legal right to this land? The answer is no. They were there, but it wasn't, it wasn't an occupancy that met the standards for a treaty, or maybe they should have, but they didn't. The Delawares came here in 1830, came all the way to Pikes Peak, 1830. Remember, they had just been removed from back east, and they were in Kansas. They came all the way out. So are they on the list? No. So this list is very difficult to try to determine. And from what I learned from several people is the 48 list is a list of the Nagpur tribes. And that has a whole different kind of standard than a legal right to land or associations with that. This is based on the ceded land in Colorado. In 1896, this guy by the name of Royce put this book together. I try to use primary source resources when I'm talking about something. So you'll see a map in here, that map in here, and then there'll be corresponding with each of those numbers, there's a corresponding treaty related to that. And so I know you probably can't see it, but all of the land, there's like an orange line down, all of that land that way in orange was Cheyenne and Arapaho land. The yellow part is where they tried to move them in 1861. The lower right-hand corner is Kiowa Comanche and Oklahoma Apache. Up in the upper left-hand corner is Shoshone, and then all the rest of this land was Ute land. What's that? So all of this land was taken from the Utes by treaties. Next slide, please. Again, it says never officially ratified. Now, this is really important that it was never ratified because in the Indian Claims Commission, they actually used this treaty as a stipulation for determining what land needed to be settled. This was a horrific thing for the Cheyenne and Arapaho and all of the tribes. With the Cheyenne and Arapaho, this settled their claim for 46 cents on an acre. And when you get a little bit further, you're going to see some of that land was never even included, or couldn't have been included. This basically was never ceded. Next slide. The Colorado Enabling Act, actually it's the Organic Act, 1861. So we're looking at Colorado, 1861. Early in the year, it says, if you have a chance to read this, what it says, it says, they're going to allow Colorado to become a territory, but they have to make sure that all of the land that belongs to Indians is not disturbed in any way. It's a law. You're not supposed to take any Indian land. Any Indian land owned by, you can't settle on it. No way. It's a law, right? It's a law. It's supposed to be followed. Next slide. Fort Wise Treaty, 1861. So same year. So what was happening was there was a gold rush. 1858. You'll have a chance to look at some of these maps up here. 1858. By 1858, the city of Denver had already plotted this whole area of land, and the lots were sold. Not possible. There was no treaty. There was nothing authorizing them to take that land and sell it. So they also knew that they couldn't get the northern Cheyennes and the northern Arapahoes to come in. So they put this in there that stipulated that if they came in within a year, they would get benefits from this treaty. And like I said, the northern Cheyennes and northern Arapahoes didn't participate. This treaty was with the upper Arkansas, the Cheyenne and Arapaho of the upper Arkansas. And this whole thing about, benefiting from this was nonsense, because they were moving them down into that little area where there was no water, no buffalo. Next slide, please. Did you know that in this treaty, when they're conducting it, the interpreter for the Arapaho cannot speak the language? How is it possible? How is it legal that one nation does not have an interpreter? This was one of the most erudite treaties I've ever read. It's like 5 pages, and it's very specific, and it's very hard to read, and you darn near have to have a PhD to understand it. Article 6 was supposed to be done in a year, never happened. No signatures authorizing the ceding of the land north of the South Platte River, 23 million acres. It goes up into Wyoming and into Nebraska. Article 11 was removed by Senate action. The State Department asked the Indian Department to correct the situation, and the amendment was supposedly signed by the leaders. The process of signing the amendment was suspect. It wasn't just suspect, it was fraud, and I'm going to show you how it was. Next slide, please. So there's the map of what would have been left of the land that belonged to the Cheyenne and Arapaho people. And they put them back on a reservation. They never did go there. They never really occupied this reservation. They never ended up there at all. Next slide, please. So everybody says, this is what I get feedback from non-Indians. Well, they didn't know. They didn't know this happened. Well, we didn't know. We didn't know that, that these people didn't sign. How are we supposed to know? Well, you know what? Evans knew. Dole, the Indian commissioner, knew. And they knew that they had to get something for the Northern Cheyennes and Northern Arapahoes because it hadn't been done. So in the report of the Commissioner of Indian Affairs, 1862, they recognized this. In addition to that, we have paperwork from a senator in Connecticut, 1860, says, hey, you guys are messing up out there in Colorado. There's 100,000 of you, but we're going to come out there and we're going to arrest you all, put you in jail for 6 months, and fine you $1,000. So Congress knew, people back east knew, everybody knew this, that this land hadn't been properly adjudicated or anything. So they knew it, the evidence. Next slide. So they're corresponding back and forth. This is the original correspondence between Evans and Dole. And what he's talking about is, he said, to arrange with the Cheyennes and Arapahoes that have not signed the treaty to do so and put them together and make some kind of arrangement that will be just for them and satisfactory to whites. Well, that's what they tried to do, or they pretended to try to do. And again, I think I'm really cautious about how I say this, but they underestimated the intellect of our Indian people. We have this natural native intelligence that is in a lot of ways superior. They understood. They understood that what they were trying to do, they were trying to take their land. They were going to destroy their opportunities for economic well-being by destroying the buffalo. They knew that. Our people knew that, and they weren't going to come in and sign anything. No way. And I think we don't get enough credit for our genius because they knew what they were doing. Next slide. Again, this is part of that correspondence. This one is 63. So now we're moving in time, 63. Again, they know it. And they still haven't done anything with it. Next slide. This is where that comes in, the Article 11. In consideration of the kind treatment of the Arapaho and Cheyenne by the citizens of Denver City and adjacent cities, be permitted by the United States government to enter into sufficient quantity of land to include any city and towns at the minimum price of $1.25 an acre. So they put this in a treaty, and they say, by the kind treatment. You know what happened the month before this was signed? Big Phil, the cannibal, who had been an escapee from a Philadelphia prison. And a bunch of these thugs went into Left Hand's camp and raped the women while he was gone. That's the kind of treatment they were getting. That's the details, the facts of history that we don't see. You don't read about these in the history books. The other thing is, the government wasn't even smart enough to know they cannot allow purchases of Indian land directly from Indians to citizens. It's illegal. That's what the Trade and Intercourse was about. Only the federal government had the authority to buy and sell Indian land. So, what do? Next slide. The State Department gets involved and says, whoa, wait a minute. You can't do that. Within 3 days of this treaty hitting, there's a letter from the State Department saying, you need an amendment. You've got to get the Indians to sign, or this is not a valid treaty. Next slide. So guess what they do? This is the official written document that sets up the amendment. They try to get the people to come into Fort Wise. September 9th, 1,000 Indians show up at Fort Wise. They're ready to negotiate. The government is 2 weeks late. They get there, there's a whole bunch of Indians there. Trouble. Actually, this land is worth over $1 trillion today. It's in the report. So they're doing this forgery. They can't get the people to sign. Basically, what it gets down to is they can't get the people in to sign. Some of these may have been, passed away. Other ones had caught in a bunch of heat from their other relatives. Says, why in the hell did you sign that? What are you giving our land away? And so they come in and they're pretty reluctant. So the government can't get them to sign, right? So what do? They cut the signatures out of the 61 treaty, the earlier treaty, and they pasted on this written document. You can see where it's pasted, but they also make a horrible mistake because when they pasted it in there, they forgot to put the X's. So in this corner of this, where you can see where somebody's come along where those signatures are, and they put plus signs. We had a cartographer look at that. Whoever did the first plus sign did them all. That's clearly fraud. So the Southern Cheyennes and Southern Arapahoes have got every justification to create an invalidation of the treaty because of fraud. It's there. We have the written documents. Next slide, please. It was signed in Washington on December 5th. I kept wondering, why are they such a big rush to get this done? Why do they have to have this land? And for you historians, 1862 is what? The Settlement Act, the Railroad Act, the School Fund Act, the Church Act, I say railroad, all of that land. They needed that land because they were planning to pass congressional authorizations to give states this land. Colorado benefited when they became a state in 1876. Just the school fund alone got 3.8 million acres of land, and it's generating $150 million a year, every year, off of Indian land, some of it stolen. And Indian people have never had a dime out of it. Not one dime out of millions and millions and millions of dollars. The school fund should be available for tribes. The youth should have the best schools. They should have the best facilities. They should have millions of dollars coming out of this fund. Other tribes should be benefited. Our education in Colorado is not good. We have lots of problems. We need to do a lot of work to try to correct it. And we need resources. We need at least $5 million this next year just to begin the problem of dealing with education in Colorado. And they're going to say, no, we can't do it because there's not enough tax revenue. Well, this doesn't have anything to do, the school fund doesn't have anything to do with tax revenue. They're realizing that gain on profits every single year, no matter what. That's why I put that one in there. Next slide. This is where they say that there was going to be an uprising because they were gathered there on September 9th. Next slide. Again, this shows those signatures. Next slide. How they put the pluses in. So this, when we talk about this, one of the things we're very careful is if I make a statement, I have to have documentation to justify what I'm saying. This is the documentation. This is the evidence that you don't read about in the Trek report. Next slide. This one has more to do with, so along the way, they're trying to get them to come in, and the northern people agree to come in and to meet with Evans. Evans says, no, I'm not going to meet with you. And basically, this is what that correspondence was about. Next slide. Denver was illegally occupied. Remember? 1834, trade and intercourse act. A 1 by 1.5 million. But not only that, there were 66 other towns in Colorado that issued titles to land without legally having the title. All of that evidence is in this part of our report. A lot of it's shocking. Our report changes the story of the history of Colorado. In this document, we looked at every incident report of an Indian person getting killed or a white person being killed in the state of Colorado from 1848 to 1887. Okay, remember? So the story is these brutal savages are attacking and killing white people everywhere in the state. It's horrible. We have to do something about it. We have to do something about it now. The truth? 210 white people were killed in that 30-year period. Correspondingly, 710 Indians were killed during the same time frame. That completely refutes any of the stories about the history of Colorado, what was happening here. What was happening here was an invasion of somebody's homeland. And that's never been reconciled. And that's what we're trying to do today. Next slide. Again, this Denver City maps. This actually shows the maps that were, you can go look at the thing. Next slide. Again, the boundaries, 1864, that was going to be able to buy the land. So they couldn't really manage it. So next slide. What they had to do was come up with a congressional act that allowed them to give the land to the settlers, but nobody was ever compensated. We were never compensated for it. I don't use the word. There's a couple words I don't like to use. I don't like to use tribes because we were nations. We were nations. When you talk about the Ute people, they had an empire. There was a Ute empire, but they don't describe us that way. They call us tribes because that's a demeaning way to define who we were. We were nations, and we had empires. And they call them settlers when they were squatters and when they were invaders. They were illegally in the land. The narrative doesn't work for us as it is. First proclamation says directs friendly Indians to go to Sand Creek. And if you don't go there, you're going to be deemed hostile. I always hated that word, hostile. It just doesn't fit who we are as a people. There's a misrepresentation. Hostile? Wouldn't you be angry if somebody came in and killed your children and burned your home? And, I would be a little bit more than hostile. I'd be seeking revenge. And that's what was happening. But that's not the way it's described. Next proclamation. I think we get number 2. Now we go to getting serious about it. Remember, you got 100,000 people here, and you got to get rid of them because they're here illegally. Or the alternative is you get rid of the Indians. So what are you going to do? What's going to happen? You order Colorado citizens, you authorize Colorado citizens to kill any Indian that's not on that reservation and take their property. That's not legal. That wasn't legal for a territorial governor to do that. Illegal activities that went on here were pervasive during this period of time. Next slide. So, you see from all of this that there was a significant movement towards Sand Creek beginning in 1861. Sand Creek it wasn't happenstance. It was a deliberate attack, a deliberate movement of people so that they could be attacked and Indian people could be removed from the state of Colorado. And what makes matters worse, they tried to keep it a secret. How many of you kids have ever heard anything about this? Are they teaching you this in class, in school? Do you guys know about any of this? How about you guys? How many of you have ever heard of this? Where did you learn it at? Not very many, huh? Because they kept it a secret. They didn't want people to know about this. For a very short period of time right after Sand Creek, there was attention from the whole United States on the state of Colorado and Sand Creek. Everybody was outraged in America. But very shortly, within a very few years, that changed. Governor Evans, who should have been convicted and probably hung, gets away scot-free. And he becomes the railroad magnate and becomes a hero in Colorado. And we had mountains named after him and streets and towns. How is that possible? And the reason is misinformation. What they did was they hid this. And when you read the historical accounts of the day written by no Indian authors, you know what they say about Sand Creek? They call it the Battle of Sand Creek. The Battle of Sand Creek. Not the massacre. And then in the books like that, what they do is they justify the killing at Sand Creek because Indian people were attacking white people all over the state. They use the Hungate incident as a perfect example of that. The Hungate incident involved the murders of some people outside of Denver, and one person committed those. It was an Indian person, but one person committed it. And instead of going after that person that did this, they went after all of our nations, all of our Indian people. One Indian does something wrong, all Indians have to pay. So that was kind of the policy. So then you go through, until 1964, all of a sudden these articles started to, 1 year, 11 articles appear in the history magazine. The one that got my attention was Prelude to War by William Unruh, and covers the land issues. That's where I learned about that assistant district attorney that was going to cross the river to survey the land and came back and said, we can't do that because we don't have the title to it. That's what sparked all of this. He almost got killed. Then in the 50s, you have terminations of Indian nations, you have forced assimilation. You got 60s, you got relocation, Indians to Denver. Next slide, please. So how was that 23 million acres of land stolen? It took me 3 years, a year after the Trek report was finished, before I found out exactly how it happened. And here's what they did. After Sand Creek, there was another treaty signed in Kansas. It's called the Little Arkansas River Treaty of 1865. And in there, Amendment 2 is where they award compensation for Sand Creek dependents. But in Article 2, they actually put the land, the northern land, north of the Platte, they list that description in that treaty. And it gets signed, and that's how they take the land. Again, no northern signatures from the Cheyenne or the Arapaho, no consultation. They snuck this thing in there, in that treaty. Next slide, please. You know, from 1970 on, we see populations increases. We get an Indian Center, the Denver Native Americans United. American Indian Movement chapters are established. We have the American Indian Higher Education Consortium, Council of Energy Resource, Coalition of Indian Controlled School Boards, Native American Rights Fund, and March Powwow starts in the 80s. You know what's significant about March Powwow? And you don't hear it. Brings thousands of people to Denver, right? Contributes millions of dollars to the Denver economy. None of it comes back to us. You know, and you know, in the Constitution, it says Indians not taxed. How many of you are paying taxes? You know, we're not supposed to be taxed. You're supposed to be a congressional amendment to change those. It doesn't happen for Indians. It has to happen for everybody else. Next slide, please. We grew from a few thousand in the 50s to reports of 200,000 American Indians occupying the Front Range. There are no Indian reservations on the Front Range or Eastern Plains. And the question was asked, what has Denver done for the first people of Colorado? And we have some things happening. Thanks to the people here in the City Council, for the first time, some good things are happening to us. And I'm excited about the future of Indian people in Denver and the surrounding communities. And I hope that we can work together in a good way with everybody, all our relatives, and find ways to make more good things happen. We need full support of everybody on that school fund to make a difference for our children going forward. We need everything we can do. I've been talking to some of our relatives, and they think, well, not only do we need these special programs, but we need to have opportunities for our kids to be able to go into trades that will help them better. We need upward bound programs like Dustin was talking about. We need one in Durango. We need one in Colorado Springs. We need one in Boulder or Denver. We need one in Fort Collins. So our children can have a fair opportunity to get an education should they choose so. And if it should be a trade education, let's make it happen. If we work together, we can do that. Next slide. Uh-oh, questions. Yes.
Del Marie, we got the microphone right here for you.
Oops, can you hear me? I have a question, Rick. I know you and I have been doing a lot of research in regards to all Native stuff that's happening with the atrocities. I want to know if you found any information on when the Northern Cheyenne, the Southern Cheyenne, Northern Arapaho, Southern Arapahos made their splits here in Colorado.
Some of the research suggests that in 1854, one member of one tribe killed a respected leader of another tribe, and that was the first evidence of the split. All of the other things happened because of other actions outside of the nations. But I think that, you know, we have representatives from the tribes that could better answer that question for sure. My information is based on, you know, something that I read about the beginning. That was the beginning of the split. And then, of course, the 61 treaty continues the split. And also, but you have to know, too, that there's been reconciliation attempts for the tribes to come together and meet. I know I went to one in Denver about 10 years ago where all the Cheyennes had come to Denver to meet. It was a big meeting. So, you know, we're working, I think, you know, that's part of that reconciliation stuff that has to happen.
I'm just going to make a quick announcement. We have about 7 minutes to take more questions, but if we don't get to your questions, pick up a comment card on your table and a pen and write your question down, and one of our staff is going to pick it up. And even if we don't get to it today, we're going to have a post report before the end of the year. Any other questions in the room?
Question?
Sid, go ahead.
Good morning, Rick. Gee, I'm always loud anyway, so. I had a question. In your opinion, Rick, what would be the possibilities of having, say, a Cheyenne Arapaho tribe of Colorado be federally recognized as a separate band than the CNA tribe of Oklahoma? What are the possibilities of having that?
I don't know. I mean, I'm
You don't
sure
know?
that, well, so I know back in the early 70s, the students at the University of Colorado were trying to create their own tribe. And there was provisions in the Interior Department for it to happen. So I suppose it could happen if, under the right circumstances, you have the right legislative support, it probably could happen. Now, I don't know what the other parts of the tribe would say about that, but
Well, maybe we could ask them what they think about that. Maybe, Dustin, could you take it over real quick?
Way to put people on the spot.
did you have a question?
He's really over there talking to Lena.
Not yet? Okay. Okay.
First, I don't think it would have to be a separate tribe. I think the Cheyenne Arapaho tribes that are located in Oklahoma are making steps to become part of Colorado, either through business ventures, also by the buying up of land. At present, we do have trust land here in Colorado already, and that is at Sand Creek. So the governor is well aware that he is our governor, we're talking about the Cheyenne Arapaho Tribe's governor, and he is working towards, and he has even asked Secretary Holland at one time in a meeting what she thought of a Cheyenne Arapaho tribe of Colorado. So the tribes are thinking down that line, but how to do it yet, we're not sure, but we're working towards that.
And everybody, we have a Cheyenne and Arapaho panel coming up next, so you'll hear more from Fred and Conrad and Lena and others. We have another question here. Go ahead.
Well, Fred just answered what I was going to say. I'm a CNA from Oklahoma, but I reside in Montana. From my understanding, we are investing in Colorado. We just named a big park, the Big Sky land. We had a ceremony regarding that, and then I believe that Sand Creek was gifted to us, which we were very grateful because it's been known as CNA massacre site, and I was told that that was gifted to us, so we're making slow strides into being recognized here in Colorado.
Thank you.
Can I take the opportunity to finish with some closing remarks? We have a situation in Colorado where they're planning to celebrate the 150, 250 year celebration. I'm opposed to that. And I'm opposed to that because you can't celebrate genocide. This history is real. This is what happened to our people. And not much has been done to compensate anything about it. And so I oppose that whole idea of celebrating our genocide because it should never happen. The next one is, I mentioned it yesterday, I hope all Indian nations come together to remove that rider on that 1871 Appropriations Act bill that took away our sovereignty. We deserve to be sovereign nations. Every one of us, all 576 of us, deserve to be sovereign nations. And the other one I'd like to see happen is I would love to see some congressional action on removing Section 22 of the Indian Claims Commission that prohibits us from being able to appeal any decisions from that commission. They were the worst in contemporary times for destroying us in almost every way they could. That's why we got 46 cents an acre. What they did to the Utes was horrible. It was outrageous. Every one of the tribes suffered significantly because of that commission. And the only time in the history of America where you have a legal case and you have no right to appeal. That's how they treated us. That's how they treat us. And that's why there's injustice. We need to think about restorative justice in America, and it starts with us today, going forward with our children here, all of our relatives. We can do it, because the power of the native mind, the power of our will, is such that we will never give up. This is the old sign. We will never give up.
Rick, if you could take just one more minute, we have a question from our youth group visiting with us today, if you'd like to entertain that question.
Yeah, so our question is like, when teaching this in a class, like, would it be a subject or like an actual like elective that you can take, especially in like a high school class? Because a lot of people just like don't care about learning stuff like this. And it's really important to know, and I just don't think that people would be like willing to listen and learn about it. So how would you go about like trying to get the attention of youngsters like us to like really trying to focus on what has happened to our people?
Well, first of all, I would hope that we could continue to provide special education opportunities, meaning supplemental education, for our students so that they can learn this from the perspective of an American Indian. And secondly, I would hope that the state legislature would find a way to build this into the curriculum for everybody in the state, so everybody has to learn about American Indians and the history. They do it in Montana, they do it in South Dakota, they do it in North Dakota. They could do it here. Part of it is we just don't have a voice in the legislature to make it happen. Thank you. Good
Thank
question.
you. Big round of applause for Rick Williams, everybody. Thank you, Rick, for all your knowledge and academia. Appreciate you.